The call came on a Tuesday, while I was elbow-deep in soil, repotting a stubborn fiddle-leaf fig for a client whose apartment cost more than my entire life. My phone vibrated across the reclaimed wood table, the screen flashing, "Mom." I almost didn't answer. Our conversations for the last 5 years had been a minefield of polite inquiries and simmering resentment. But some primal cellular tug made me wipe my hands and pick up. Maya. Her voice was thin, stretched tight over a chasm of pain. It wasn't a greeting. It was a statement of fact, a warning. "Mom, what's wrong?" A sharp, ragged breath. "It's your grandmother. She's gone, Maya, this morning, in her sleep." The world, for a moment, lost its sound. The fig tree, the expensive apartment, the whole of New York City just vanished. I was 10 years old again, standing on the wind-swept cliffs of Saltwick House, the smell of brine and gorse filling my lungs, my grandmother's hand, rough and warm, in mine. "Remember, Maya girl," she'd say, her voice a low rumble like the tide over stones. "A woman who owns her own ground can never be truly lost." And I had gotten lost anyway. "The funeral is on Friday," my mother continued, her tone already shifting from grief to logistics, the territory where she was most comfortable. "You'll need to come home." Home. The word was a punch to the gut. Saltwick, the remote coastal village in Maine, hadn't been my home since I was 18, since the fight that had sent me running for the anonymity of a city that didn't know my name or my family's history. Of course, I'll be there," I heard myself say. The line went dead. I stood there, my dirty hands hanging at my sides, the ghost of sea salt on my tongue. My grandmother, Eleanor Rose, the formidable matriarch, the keeper of secrets, was gone. And I was being summoned back to the one place I'd sworn I'd never return to. The drive from New York to Maine was a journey back in time, the slick glass and steel of the city giving way to the stubborn, ancient green of New England. With every mile, the knot in my stomach tightened. Saltwick wasn't just a place. It was a character in my life, a demanding, beautiful, and unforgiving one. I pulled up to Saltwick House not as a returning granddaughter, but as a stranger. The 3-story Victorian, clad in weathered gray shingles, stood as it always had, a defiant sentinel on the edge of the cliff, the Atlantic Ocean churning relentlessly at its feet. It was both majestic and melancholy, a monument to my family's stubbornness. Before I could even knock, the heavy oak doors swung open. My mother, Caroline, stood there. She looked older, the lines around her mouth more deeply etched, her blonde hair streaked with more silver. She was dressed in a severe black dress, her posture as rigid as the cliffs. Maya. She didn't move to hug me. We hadn't touched in years. "Mom." The air between us was thick with everything unsaid. The fight, my father's absence, the life I'd built without her blessing. The house smelled the same, beeswax, old books, and that underlying, ever-present scent of the sea. But it felt different, emptier. The heart of it was gone. "The reading of the will is tomorrow, directly after the service," my mother said, her heels clicking on the wide plank floor as she led me inside. "Your brother and his wife arrived last night." Of course they had. Liam, the golden child, the one who had stayed, who had chosen the family business, a small, struggling artisanal saltworks that had been in my grandmother's family for generations. He'd chosen duty. I'd chosen freedom. In my mother's eyes, there was no contest as to who was the better child. I found Liam in the kitchen, the warm, chaotic heart of the house that had been my grandmother's domain. He was leaning against the old Aga stove, a mug in his hand. He looked tired. Maya. He did hug me, a brief hard squeeze that felt more like an assessment of my solidity than an embrace. I made it. His wife, Chloe, glided into the room. She was all sharp angles and designer black, a city mouse utterly out of place in this house of salt and stone. She offered me a thin, perfunctory smile. Maya, so sorry for your loss. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. Chloe had despised my grandmother, seeing her as an obstacle to Liam selling this drafty old mausoleum and moving his business and his inheritance somewhere more profitable. "Where's Dad?" I asked, looking between them. Liam and my mother exchanged a glance, a familiar, weary look. "He won't be coming," my mother said, her voice final. "You know how he and your grandmother were." I did. My father, the charming dreamer, had never measured up in Eleanor's eyes. His grand schemes had bled the family's finances dry for years before he'd finally left when I was 15, fading away like a ghost. Another man who couldn't handle the weight of the Rose women. The funeral was a blur of black clothes and somber faces from the village. People I'd known my whole life pressed my hand and murmured condolences, their eyes curious, assessing. The prodigal granddaughter returns. I stood between my mother, a pillar of controlled grief, and Liam, the grieving grandson, feeling like an imposter in my own family. After the last mourner had left, we gathered in my grandmother's study, the inner sanctum. The lawyer, a Mr. Davies, who had known me since I was in diapers, sat behind the vast oak desk with a single document in front of him. "We are here to honor the last will and testament of Eleanor Rose," he began, adjusting his glasses. My mother sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap. Liam had an arm around Chloe, who was practically vibrating with anticipation. I just felt numb. The will was straightforward at first. Small bequest to long-serving staff, a donation to the village library. Then Mr. Davies cleared his throat. "To my daughter, Caroline, I leave my personal jewelry and the sum of $100,000. My mother's jaw tightened. It was a generous sum, but it wasn't the house. It wasn't the land. "To my grandson, Liam, and his wife, Chloe, I leave the Saltwick Saltworks business, its assets, and the associated trademarks, with the hope that they will continue its legacy." Liam let out a slow breath, a mix of relief and triumph. Chloe's smile was a flash of victory. They had the business, the profitable part of the inheritance. Then Mr. Davies turned his gaze to me. I braced myself. A token, a piece of jewelry, a final gentle dismissal. "And to my granddaughter, Maya Rose, I leave the entirety of Saltwick House, its surrounding lands, the cliff path, and the cove." The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the distant crash of waves. I stared at him, certain I had misheard him. I what?" "You heard him," my mother said, her voice a shard of ice. She was looking at me not with grief, but with pure, undiluted betrayal. That's impossible," Chloe burst out, standing up. "She hasn't set foot here in a decade. Liam is the one who has worked for this family. He's the one who deserves it." "The house is not the business, Chloe," Mr. Davies said calmly. "Eleanor was very specific. The house and the land go to Maya unconditionally." Liam was staring at the floor, his face pale. "Why?" he whispered, the word meant for me, for our grandmother, for the universe. "Why would she do this?" I had no answer. My mind was reeling. Saltwick House, the cliffs, the cove. It was all mine. The one thing I had run from was now the one thing I owned. It felt less like an inheritance and more like a sentence. My mother stood, her chair scraping against the floor. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw the full force of her hurt, a lifetime of it, directed squarely at me. "You," she said, her voice trembling with a fury I had never heard before. "You, who turned your back on all of this, on her, on me. You waltz back in here after years, and she gives you everything." She shook her head. A terrible, final gesture. I will never understand it. She walked out, leaving me alone in the study with my shocked brother, his furious wife, and the deed to a kingdom I had never wanted. The war for Saltwick House had begun, and I, its reluctant queen, had just been crowned. The first skirmish happened at dinner, a tense, silent affair in the formal dining room we almost never used. Chloe spent the meal picking at her food, her anger of physical heat radiating across the table. "It just doesn't make any sense, financially or logically," she said finally, breaking the silence. "Liam's business is here. We need to expand, to build a proper production facility. The logical place is on the land behind the house. How can we do that if Maya owns it?" "The land is not for building on, Chloe," I said, repeating my grandmother's words like a catechism. "It's protected. It's part of the conservation covenant." "A covenant your grandmother put in place," Chloe shot back, "which can be challenged, especially with the right economic incentives for the village." This was her home, not a development opportunity. Liam finally looked up. "It's also a business, Maya, a business that employs people in this village, a business that is struggling. That land could be its salvation. And you've been gone. You don't know what it's like here now." His words stung, because they were true. I had been gone. I'd built a life as a horticulturalist, designing serene, manageable green spaces for people who saw nature as decoration. I'd left behind the raw, untamable wilderness of Saltwick. "Grandmother left it to me," I said, my voice quieter than I intended. "She had her reasons." "What reasons?" Liam demanded, his composure cracking. "That you were her favorite? That she felt sorry for you because Dad left and Mom was hard on you? This isn't a consolation prize, Maya. This is our legacy." The accusation hung in the air. Is that what it was? Pity? A final, posthumous apology for a childhood that had often been lonely? I pushed my chair back. "I need some air." I fled the house, the screen door slamming behind me like a gunshot. I walked down the familiar path to the cove, the one my grandmother had taught me to navigate. The moon was full, painting a silver road on the black water. The air was cold and clean, scoured by the sea. I sat on a damp rock, pulling my knees to my chest, and finally let the tears come. They were tears of grief, of confusion, of sheer, overwhelming pressure. I had inherited a battlefield, and my own family was the enemy. "Tough first day as landlady." The voice, deep and laced with a familiar, dry amusement, came from behind me. I spun around. Leaning against a gnarled pine was Sam Flynn. His dark hair was longer, streaked with a little gray at the temples, and his face was more weathered than the boy I'd known, but his eyes, the color of the sea under a stormy sky, were the same. They saw too much. Sam Flynn, the boy I shared my first kiss with in this very cove, the son of a local fisherman, the one my grandmother had always been fond of, and the one my mother had thoroughly disapproved of. He'd become a master boatwright, known for his beautiful, handcrafted wooden dories. "Sam," I breathed, hastily wiping my cheeks. "What are you doing here?" "I still walk this path. Pay my respects to the old lady." She nodded towards the sea. She loved this cove, said it held its secrets well. He took a step closer, his hands shoved in the pockets of his worn jacket. Heard about the will? The village gossip mill is faster than fiber optics. I let out a wet, shaky laugh. I bet. I'm the talk of the town, huh? The ungrateful granddaughter who got the crown jewels. Something like that. He came and sat on the rock beside me, not too close, but his presence was a solid, comforting warmth in the cold night. For what it's worth, I think Eleanor knew what she was doing. Does anyone else? I asked, the plea in my voice unmistakable. He was quiet for a moment, listening to the waves. Your grandmother wasn't a sentimental woman, Maya. She didn't do things out of pity. She did them out of purpose. If she left you Saltwick, it's because she believed you were the only one who could handle its weight and its secrets. Secrets? I asked. What secrets? He just gave me a cryptic smile and stood up, brushing the sand from his trousers. You'll figure it out. You're a Rose woman, aren't you? Stubborn as the rocks and just as hard to move once you've set your mind. He walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the path, leaving me more confused than ever. The next week was a master class in familial cold warfare. My mother moved her things into the cottage on the edge of the property that had once been the groundskeeper's quarters, a silent, powerful protest. She spoke to me only when necessary, her sentences clipped and formal. Liam and Chloe were a constant, pressing presence. They presented me with business plans, projections, artist renderings of a modern saltworks facility that would indeed be ideally situated on the flat land behind the house. It was logical. It was smart. It would destroy the wild, untouched beauty of the place. It's progress, Maya, Liam argued, his frustration mounting. You can't just mothball this place as a shrine to grandmother. It has to have a future. Its future doesn't have to be a factory, I retorted. What will you do then? Turn it into a bed and breakfast? You who couldn't wait to escape this backwater? Their words picked at the scab of my own doubt. What was I going to do? I had a life in New York, clients, an apartment lease. I couldn't stay here forever, playing guardian of a relic. Driven by a need to understand, I began to clean out my grandmother's study. It felt like a violation, sifting through her papers, her ledgers, her life. I found bundles of old letters, photographs of my grandfather, a man who had died young and was nothing more than a smiling ghost in a frame. And then, tucked inside a leather-bound copy of Rachel Carson's The Sea Around Us, I found a sealed envelope. My name was on the front, written in my grandmother's firm, looping script. My hands trembled as I broke the seal. My dearest Maya, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are sitting at my desk, feeling, I imagine, terribly alone and more than a little angry with me. Forgive an old woman her final bit of meddling. I did not give you Saltwick because you were my favorite. I gave it to you because you are the strongest of us all. You had the courage to leave. Caroline never did. Liam is too afraid of his own shadow to truly lead. But you, Maya, you have salt in your blood and granite in your spine. You are wondering why. The simple answer is that the house and land were never meant to be part of the business. They are something else entirely. A sanctuary, a promise. Your grandfather's family, my family, has protected this cove for generations. It is one of the last pristine spawning grounds for the winter flounder in this region. The covenant is ironclad, but it will be challenged by your family, by the town, by developers. They will see only profit, not purpose. Your mother will never understand. She sees my love for this land as a rejection of her. It was not. It was simply a choice I now pass to you. There is a box for you, buried at the foot of the sentinel pine, where you and Sam Flynn used to hide from the world. The combination is your birthday. Do not let them break it, Maya. Do not let them pave this paradise. It is your ground. Stand on it. With all my love, Grandmother. Tears streamed down my face, no longer of confusion, but of a fierce, blazing clarity. This wasn't about a house. It was about a cause, a legacy far greater than a family squabble. I looked out the window at the sentinel pine, the ancient, twisted tree that stood guard over the highest point of the cliff. A box. A secret. I knew what I had to do. The earth at the base of the sentinel pine was hard and unyielding, tangled with roots that felt like the gnarled fingers of the past clutching their secret. I'd brought a small trowel from the garden shed, and the act of digging felt both sacred and criminal. The moon was a sliver tonight, offering little light, and the wind whipped my hair into a frenzy. I felt like a child again, playing at treasure. But the weight of my grandmother's letter in my pocket was a stark reminder this was no game. The trowel hit metal with a dull clang that seemed to echo in the quiet of the cliff top. My heart leapt into my throat. I scrabbled at the soil with my hands, my nails filling with dirt, until I could grasp the edges of a small, rusted metal lockbox. It was heavier than it looked. I hauled it out of the earth and sat back on my heels, clutching it to my chest. Back in the sanctuary of my grandmother's study, with the door locked, I wiped the box clean. It was a simple, sturdy thing, with a combination lock. My birthday. I spun the dial with trembling fingers. 031194. The lock clicked open. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, were not jewels or stacks of cash. There was a thick leather-bound journal, its pages filled with my grandmother's handwriting. Beneath it, a stack of old photographs and a separate sealed legal document. I picked up the journal first. It was not a diary of daily life. It was a record. Meticulous notes, dates, water salinity levels, bird migration patterns, fish spawning counts. It was a scientific log of the cove's ecosystem, dating back 50 years. There were pressed flowers, sketches of marine life, and newspaper clippings about coastal erosion and development battles up and down the coast. This was her life's work, her true legacy. She hadn't just loved this land, she had been its dedicated silent scientist. The legal document was a shock. It was a newer addendum to the Conservation Covenant, one I'd never known existed. It designated Saltwick Cove and the surrounding 50 acres as a protected marine research zone in partnership with the University of Maine. The terms were brutal and brilliant. Any attempt to develop the land for commercial or industrial purposes would trigger an immediate legally mandated transfer of the entire property to the university in perpetuity. The house, the land, everything. It stripped the family of any power to challenge the protection. She had built a fortress of law around her sanctuary, and she had made its warden. A slow smile spread across my face. This changed everything. Liam and Chloe's plans for a factory were not just undesirable, they were legally impossible. My mother's resentment, while still a painful wound, was now a separate issue from the fate of Saltwick. The land was safe. The next morning, I called a family meeting in the kitchen. The tension was as thick as chowder. My mother sat with her back ramrod straight, her coffee untouched. Liam looked exhausted, and Chloe was a tightly coiled spring of impatience. "I've made a decision about the land," I began, my voice steady. Chloe cut in. "Finally! Look, Maya, we've drawn up a proposal for a long-term lease. The numbers are very favorable." I held up a hand. "I'm not leasing the land, Chloe. I'm not selling it, and you're not building on it." Liam's face fell. "Maya, be reasonable." "I am being reasonable," I said, and I slid the addendum to the covenant across the table. They read it in silence. My mother's face went from stony to ashen. She understood the implications, instantly. This wasn't my choice. It was my grandmother's, codified in law. A choice that, once again, had excluded her. Liam slumped back in his chair. She tied our hands. Completely. Chloe shot to her feet, her chair screeching against the floor. "This is ridiculous. We'll challenge it. We'll get a lawyer." She was an old woman. She was clearly not in her right mind. She was of perfectly sound mind, I said coldly, tapping the journal. She was a brilliant naturalist who spent 50 years documenting why this land must be protected. This is her life's work. It's more important than a factory. "It's more important than your own family?" my mother whispered, her voice cracking. She looked at me, and the betrayal in her eyes was a physical blow. "You're choosing a patch of dirt and some fish over your own brother's livelihood." "I'm honoring our grandmother's last wish," I said, though the words felt inadequate. "And I'm not choosing against Liam's livelihood. The salt works is still his. He can still expand it, just not here. He can find another location." "With what money?" "The business can't afford to buy new land. This was the only way." The meeting dissolved into a chaos of accusations and hurt. It was the same fight we'd always had, just with higher stakes. My mother saw it as a rejection. Liam saw it as a death sentence for his dreams. And I was left standing in the middle, holding a box of secrets that felt more like a bomb. In the days that followed, the house became a tomb. My mother refused to speak to me. Liam and Chloe had packed their bags and left for Portland, their anger a cloud that trailed behind them. I was alone in the big, empty house, with the wind and the ghosts for company. I threw myself into my grandmother's work. I continued her logs, learning to test the water, to identify the birds. I spent my days on the cliffs or in the cove, my hands once again growing rough and salty. The land was beginning to feel less like an inheritance and more like a part of me, a limb I hadn't known was missing. And Sam was often there. He'd appear on the path, a quiet presence, offering a sandwich or a flask of hot tea. He didn't offer platitudes or advice. He just was. "She showed me some of her findings, he said one afternoon as we sat on the rocks, watching the tide creep in. He was sanding a piece of wood for a new dory, the rhythmic sound soothing. The old girl was sharp as a tack, knew more about this ecosystem than any professor. "Why didn't she tell anyone?" I asked, the question that had been haunting me. Sam paused his sanding. Who would have believed her? They'd have called her a sentimental old woman. This way she built an unassailable case, and she waited for the right general to lead the defense. He looked at me, and the warmth in his eyes was a balm. "You're doing the right thing, Maya." "I feel like I'm destroying my family," I said. "Some structures need to fall so stronger ones can be built," he said softly. "Your family was built on silence and duty. Maybe it's time to build something new, something on truth." His words settled deep inside me. He was right. The fight for Saltwick wasn't just about land. It was about breaking a generational cycle of silence and sacrifice. The confrontation with my mother was inevitable. I found her in the garden of the cottage, viciously deadheading roses. "We need to talk, Mom." "What is there to say, Maya? You've made your position perfectly clear." "It wasn't my position, it was grandmother's." She whirled around, her eyes blazing. "Don't you dare hide behind her. You have a choice. You could have torn up that document. You could have sided with your brother, with me. But you didn't. You chose her. You always chose her." And there it was, the rotten core of it all. "This was never about the land for you, was it?" I said, the realization dawning. "This was about you and her. This was about you feeling like you were never enough." Tears finally welled in her eyes, breaking through the icy facade. "I stayed, Maya. I stayed in this town, in this house, and I cared for her when she was old. I did everything a good daughter was supposed to do. For what? For her to leave the heart of it all to the granddaughter who couldn't wait to get away. She loved you more." "She didn't love me more," I said, my own voice thick with emotion. "She saw that I was like her, stubborn and difficult and too loud. She saw herself in me. And she knew that you were like Dad. You wanted a quieter life. There's no shame in that, Mom. The shame is in resenting me for it." The fight went out of her then. She sank onto a stone bench, looking small and lost. I just wanted her to be proud of me. "I think she was," I said, sitting beside her, not touching, but close, in her own way. But she was a woman who valued strength above all else. And leaving, Mom, that took strength she never had. Staying was her strength. Leaving was mine. They're just different. We sat in silence for a long time, listening to the bees and the lavender. The wall between us hadn't fallen, but a single brick had been removed. It was a start.
A week later, Liam called. He wasn't yelling. He just sounded tired. "I'm looking at a commercial unit in Ellsworth. It's not perfect, but it's workable. We can get a loan." "I want to help," I said. "With the loan. Use my share of the inheritance from Dad's life insurance." It was money I'd never touched, a bitter reminder of the man who'd left us. Now it could be a bridge. There was a long pause. "Why?" he asked, his voice wary. "Because you're my brother, and because the Saltworks is a part of Saltwick too. It deserves to thrive, just not on top of the cove." Another silence, then a sigh that sounded like a release. Okay, Maya. Thank you." It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a truce. With the immediate war over, something else had space to grow. What was between me and Sam? It wasn't the frantic teenage passion I remembered. It was slower, deeper. It was in the way he'd leave a fresh caught lobster on my doorstep, the way he'd listened for hours as I talked about my grandmother's journals, the way his hand would find the small of my back when we walked the cliff path, steadying me without a word. One evening, we were in his boathouse, the air rich with the smell of sawdust and salt. He was finishing the dory, a beautiful, sleek thing. "It's almost done," I said, running a hand along the smooth gunwale. "Aye," he said, watching me. "She's ready for the water." He put down his plane and came to stand before me. His eyes were serious. "The thing about a dory, Maya," he said, his voice low, "is that it's built for these waters. It's tough. It's resilient. It knows how to handle the rough stuff. It's not a fancy city yacht. It's built for home." He cupped my face, his thumb stroking my cheek. "I'm built for home too.
I never left because I never found a reason to. I think I was waiting for my reason to come back. And then he kissed me. It wasn't a question or a demand. It was a homecoming. It was the feeling of a key turning in a lock I didn't know I had. When we broke apart, I was breathless, my forehead resting against his. "I'm not leaving, Sam," I whispered. He smiled.